Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of AI Prom's Differential Understanding. This is your host, Grace Shao. Joining me today is Gary Ngan, CFO and Company Secretary of Meitu Inc., an AI-driven imaging company focused on making image, video, and design creation more straightforward and efficient. Now, Gary joined Meitu in 2015 and has overseen the company's financial strategy, investor relations, and company secretarial matters through its evolution from a consumer photo editing app company into a broader AI visual creation platform. Even though Meitu is mostly known for its photo editing capabilities on the consumer end, especially in China, it is actually building a portfolio across prosumer visual editing, AI productivity workflows, and AI agent model infrastructure globally. Now, thank you so much for joining us today, Gary. Hey, Gary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Grace. Good to be here.
Yeah. Super excited to have this conversation and really like your background. Very cool. So let's get started. Gary, tell us about what you guys are up to these days, because for a lot of investors and users, when they think of Meitu, even myself, frankly, we think about the selfie beauty editing app. How would you define Meitu today? Do you still think it can be simply categorized as a consumer AI company? Or is it much more than that these days?
Sure. So I think Meitu is no longer just a selfie or beauty editing company. I think it's an AI application company specializing in photo, video, and design. We focus on very high value verticals where we can leverage AI to deliver high quality results to our users, who we usually refer to as prosumers, i.e. the ones who have strong design needs, but with no prior training. So I think this is the way how I would define Meitu today.
Awesome. So tell us about your products. So you have quite an array of products. I do know some of them are more consumer facing, some of them a bit more prosumer facing, like you said. Some of them maybe even a bit more enterprise facing. Wing, Peachy, Design Kit, KaiPai. I'm just dropping names these days right now, but help us kind of map out the ecosystem.
Sure. So we think about Meitu's product categories in product portfolio in two main categories. So it's application for leisure and application for productivity. The application for leisure includes the Meitu app, BeautyCam, Wing, and Peachy. Basically, they serve the use cases such as photo taking, photo editing, and video editing. The purpose is to share on social media. And the Meitu app and BeautyCam are our core consumer application. Wing extends our capability from photo to editing video, and Peachy is our latest portrait retouching agent, focusing on personalizing editing styles. And then the second bucket are the application for productivity, which includes Design Kit, KaiPai, VMake, and RoboNeo, serving professional and commercial content creation needs. Design Kit focuses on e-commerce product listing design, helping merchants and creators produce images, model images, marketing material much more efficiently. And KaiPai and VMake focus on talking video and marketing video creation. KaiPai is more focused on serving the domestic Chinese market in certain verticals such as insurance, real estate, while VMake is seeing strong traction in the US fitness and wellness market. So to give you a sense, KaiPai as of May this year, monthly active creators reached about 3 million. Cumulative content creator exceeded 400 million. And VMake in the 2026 first quarter ARR was about 4 million USD. And then moving on to RoboNeo, it's our native AI agents product launch in July 2025. It's currently targeting the AI daily drama vertical. Its agent workflows can support script writing, characters, storyboards, visual generation, and asset management. So I have just given rough idea of the different vertical products, but I think the ecosystem logic is very important because many new products come from user insight from our existing products. So for example, Design Kit came from poster design function within the Meitu app, and KaiPai came from the AI teleprompter feature in the BeautyCam, and Peachy came from the new user behaviors we observed in the Meitu app. So our portfolio is not a random collection of apps. It's a structured expansion from consumer imaging into AI native workflows across photo, video, and design.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. But I do have a question, which is like in the age of AI agents, would it make sense that for you guys to consolidate a lot of your apps now, or are you guys still thinking of keeping them more separate, kind of more fragmented for your different fragment users?
Yeah, I think in the age of agents, we still believe that we should focusing on high value verticals because different verticals actually have many differences. first of all, the aesthetic standards is very different. You can have, well, I'll give you an example. The word handsome guy, for example, would be very different in an application serving the US market versus an Asian market. And even within the Asian market, if you are addressing let's say you're e-commerce merchants, you're selling, let's say, gym products versus formal apparel, that word handsome is going to be also very differently interpreted across all these verticals. So I think being able to segregate these different verticals give you a very good head start in terms of sort of focusing on the aesthetic standards that particular vertical needs. And also, different users within these different verticals have very different user behavior and workflows. So I think it will be very important to build in those workflows and these know-hows within those verticals in order to create products. So I think it is right to say that with agents, you can be slightly more covering a slightly bigger boundary, but I think you still want to focus on different verticals to maximize the output for the user and also make it more efficient and easier to market within that vertical as well.
That's really interesting. And I think you touch on something that a lot of people are discussing when they think about visual AI, which is how do you ensure consistency and accuracy when you're translating language, especially, you're translating like text to visual, and the text could be in different languages. And like you said, the way that people use words can be quite subjective, right? How do you actually make sure that kind of identity description and nuance is not lost? And, if say you say handsome, and I say handsome, that could be potentially a very different meaning in our head, right? How do you kind of ensure that? One is fragmentation you mentioned, but what is the technical end of in that kind of assurance?
Yeah, so I think first of all, instead of saying fragmentation, it's like the vertical focus is going to be very important. That would set the tone. But obviously behind that, we have a very large team of designers controlling, they guarding the different control points in the model fine tuning stages to basically set the right direction for the aesthetic standards within that vertical. I think that's something that's very differentiated in our product offerings. And I think once you move a step forward, the sort of the data flywheel is also very important, because I think users within that vertical will give out some data, like what photos that they have used, which photo they have edited, which they have thrown away. So that would also be a very important point for us to get the right image creation. And obviously, we are also in the camp that the controllability of these visual application needs to not just using AI, but also some manual touch-up in the end for users to sort of give out the last mile improvement. Because again, aesthetic is very subjective. So I don't think an AI model, even if it's working day to day with you, you also always have some subjective comments and small edits that you want to work on that. Now, one other interesting point that I want to talk about is when we are talking about aesthetic standards, usually in the case of leisure products, the face is usually yours. So you actually have a strong say and strong sense of what is good for you. And the way how we learn about that is, well, we study the trend that you are in, let's say in your particular geographic locations. We'll give those recommendations, give you to try. And then as you're using the application, you tell us basically what's most suitable for you. One of the example, Peachy, is actually a newly launched app that we have, is that you can upload 3 to 5 sets of original photos and edited photos that is done by yourself. And then we were able to learn that pattern and create a specialized model for you. So the next time when you want to edit your photo, you can just call up that model that you trained yourself and to apply the aesthetic standards that you want to your photos. Now, on the productivity side, however, I don't think aesthetic is the ultimate holy grail of a image. It's very important, but whether that photo video is effective in driving conversion or driving likes, comments, it's also very important. So when we are delivering our images and video to our users, we sort of take the particular vertical's sort of key data and the things that are important to drive these results metrics into consideration. So it's not just a subjective sort of aesthetic, oh, whether this guy is handsome, but whether this guy is able to sell your product would be the right image and video that's worked for you. So I think
That's
the
really
two camps
interesting.
are quite different.
Yeah. Because I think from a pure consumer usage point of view, like it's really interesting you point out the nuance. Like if I upload my own face to like a Meitu, it gives me like a very, very smooth, pale skin and like very, very angular jawline, like chin. But if you put it on an American, like fine-tuned or something, it's much more like contoured, it's like it's a very different aesthetics. But it's interesting to your point, if you're actually prosumer, meaning you're on the kind of content creator or influencer end, which I'm assuming that's where you actually generate most of your revenue, right? Or e-commerce platforms. It's actually more important that they drive sales. I want to ask something slightly more philosophical before I get into the businesses, but technology often changes art, right? And a lot of people are saying, look, photography changed painting, software like, the Final Cut Pros and the Photoshops and whatnot actually changed photography and video. How is AI now changing how visual artists approach their vision and craft? Because I've also spoken to companies like Kuaishou, where they have Kling and they are partnering up with AI native film studios. So these people are creatives, but they don't view AI as disrupting their work. They actually use AI as the tool for them to create their work. I'm just kind of wondering what you think of it on a high level.
Yeah. So if you look at our core value proposition at our heart, right? So the mission statement is uniting art and technology, right? But I think if you read one step down, we are trying to democratize design and art and creative expression. So I think what AI is changing is we are able to now AI is enabling people who has the sort of creative ideas, but without the actual training and skills to be able to express that. And I think that's very important because a lot of the times we have a lot of creative ideas that we want to express it, but because our motor skill is not refined, we don't know how to put colors together. I think these are all the things that AIs are able to help us to deliver. So that is something which I think is fundamentally changing the sort of artistic landscape to a certain extent. So it's, I think, with other companies saying that, oh well, existing professional filmmakers and designers can use AI to make things more efficiently, or they can create things in a different way. It's great, but I think that the bigger impact to the world is to enable a lot of people who are used to be unable to put out anything, that they have that idea and unable to express it. Now they're able to express it. So I think this is what really is fundamentally changing the
That's really
industry.
interesting. Yeah. Here, I have a question. Like we kind of talked a lot about how you have a ton of different products, right? And you explained to me how it was very targeted verticals, sorry, for different verticals. But are these products like how do I understand MeituHub, MiracleVision? Are these kind of the operating system, or how do I understand that?
Yeah, so I think MiracleVision and MeituHub, they are the sort of the visual or image and video infrastructure that we have. Our application is actually built on top of these things. So these two are actually going, hand in hand. We are still fundamentally an AI application company, but we also still need some visual infrastructure. To give you an example, over 90% of our AI outputs is actually coming from our own models outputs. So I think there are a lot of situations where we think the models that we fine tune ourselves performs better than the third party models out there. So there are things that people don't necessarily focus so much on. So these are the things that we have to put in R&D and sort of create that infrastructure for ourselves. And also MeituHub, for example, is the ability for us to export that technology, so people can use our API, can use our skills to put together application of their own, or integrate that into their own system. So I think these are the things that we're also supplying to basically reinforce our vision to democratize design.
And that was perfect segue, because my next question was that I understand your team fine tunes your own models, but you also building on various open source models, right? Why is it that Meitu actually need your own model? Because if we look at traditional application companies, why do traditional application companies need to have that kind of foundational layer as well? And to make this question even broader, if you can comment, is why is that so many Chinese consumer internet companies are pushing out models, right? You see even like Meituan, ride hailing companies, like food delivering companies, all pushing out models. Is this like a cultural push or like I guess first from your company level thinking, but also from ecosystem in China? How do you guys view this competition right now?
Right. So, I mean, it's a bit harder to comment on the overall market because fundamentally what we do, the visual image and video models are quite different from the language models. So I'll just focus on discussing why we're doing our own models. It's because, as I said, our belief is that one general model is going to be quite difficult to perform well in all kinds of verticals, simply because the context is so important. So if we do not have our own models, then the aesthetic standards will be set by the third party. And when the third party create that particular model, they have an idea of what aesthetic standards they have. They will have their own idea of what should be generally good given a certain prompt word. But that might not be applicable in the verticals that we are working on. So that's why we always have to have our own model to serve that particular purpose. But why we're integrating the third-party model is because sometimes even within a vertical, there are a lot more sort of corner cases or edge cases, which our core model may not be optimized to deal with those things. And in that situation, we call upon the third-party API to serve the users. So I think as an AI application company, we're the only sort of point of optimization is to optimize user satisfaction. And we are trying to use a combination of our own models and third-party models to serve that purpose. And sometimes as we see, there are more and more users, calling upon third-party APIs on creating or putting out a similar set of prompts or working on sort of like creating similar situations, then we will also augment our models to cover that particular scenario as well. So our model it's continuously growing, but we basically make our model very, very vertical driven. So we have told the market that we're not in the business of creating a general purpose model. We're always creating vertical model, but that doesn't mean that we are giving up our model training altogether.
Understand. There's a lot of industry know-how in the sense of each vertical, right, that you guys have. So, and when it comes to which models, like which foundation models you choose for which tasks, I spoke to one of your colleagues previously at Super AI. It was awesome. Rocky, your VP of R&D, right? So we were discussing the fact that you actually use one Happy Horse, even the startup video Rebirth. You use a series of open source models right now. What's the main factor for you guys to choose which model to build on for what vertical, or how do you delegate those tasks for each model?
So there are, on a very high level, there are really just two main forces behind that. One is user behavior. So if a user use, let's say, model A to create a certain task, and a lot of these users don't press save or they do not continue to work on that, then obviously we probably need to serve that particular task with a different model. So it's a sort of like a data flywheel type of operations. And the other thing that we look at is we actually have a very large team of designers involving very intimately in training these models. So the designer will actually set the standard of what should be the right model to use for a particular task. And I think this is a very important differentiation of our company versus most, I would say, tech companies, because I'm not sure if you're aware, our founder and CEO is actually a art student by training. So in his days is actually the #1 student in the Tsinghua Art Academy entrance exam in oil painting. So in his mind, aesthetic standard is always very, very important. And because of that, the designers in our company has a very, very strong say in basically every product and every features that we launch out. And throughout the past, more than a decade of designer training all the other staff, and in fact the PMs, the R&D engineers, a lot of them actually have very high aesthetic standard now. So I think our company is organized towards delivering the best aesthetic standards for users, and that is very differentiated from most tech companies, because I believe most other model companies would have the idea that, oh, we're able to solve this problem. The photo is done, the video is generated, and that's the end of the story. Or they will have the main character is stable throughout the 3 minutes of the whole video, so this is mission accomplished. But I think for our designer, apart from looking at the stability of the main characters, they'll also look at, well, is there anything in the lighting that's sort of not realistic? Is the color fitting that particular vertical? Is there anything wrong from an artistic pair of eyes? I think these are the things that we really, really focus on fine tuning. So that, again, it's something which we are very proud of ourselves, and I think this is a main differentiator.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think even as a consumer user, I haven't used some of your more professional series of products, but I can say without a doubt, your products have that extra like last mile touch up tools that just others don't offer. Like it's so meticulous, it's so accurate, it goes to the nitty gritty. You can zoom into the pores or the details in the background, and it's very interesting to hear about the background of your founder and that kind of legacy, and I guess that culture really kind of shines through your products as well. So speaking of legacy, I do want to understand Meitu's AI legacy and strategy. Given that you guys have been working in the image and video space for over a decade now, you obviously have a vast database and know-how in visuals. And then how does all of that, I guess, industry know-how or industry expertise now translate in the age of a generative AI, and then in the future of how we see Meitu's strategy in the agentic world?
So I think generative AI has really changed the speed and the scope and value of what we can deliver. So first of all, speed. New AI capabilities can now be translated into user-facing features much faster, helping us to launch popular effects globally and drive overseas growth. And second, in terms of user experience, Gen AI enables effect from traditional computer vision technology that could not fully achieve. For example, facial body retouching was no longer just manual adjustment. Now AI can reconstruct details, lighting, texture in a much more natural way. And then I think the sort of the target addressable market expansion, AI also help us to broaden into productivity workflows like design kit, Kaipai. These are the things that we traditionally are unable to do. So I think overall speaking, AI is very empowering in terms of getting to where we want to go, because before AI, right, all we can deliver, all we can create is better tools. But in order to use those tools, you kind of still need to have some, like, you still have to have pretty good aesthetic standard or some understanding of the basics. Otherwise, giving you those tools doesn't really help you do much. But AI, with AI now, you can sort of, well, you still have to have 10-20% of that, but it reduce massively to a point where AI can give you a lot of choices that you can choose from, and then you can start building from there. So this basically helps us to move from the sort of leisure applications to the productivity applications. I think this is really what the strategy is about today.
Yeah. And AI in many ways can act like a guide, like a mentor if you are a bit quite new and to a certain craft or sector. So I can see how that works. Yeah. So then I will ask the kind of spicy question, which is AI compute cost is obviously extremely high. So how does that make sense for the economics right now? Because image and visual generation extremely token like costly. So does AI compute affect your gross margins right now, or are you seeing ROI right now?
So as I said, currently the over 90% of our like the generative outputs are actually from our own models. So as long as we're using our own models, the cost is actually very, very manageable. So our gross margin is still over 70%. And especially when you're doing a lot of the works. Let's say you're editing your own face or you're editing a product photo. These things are not purely AI generated. You might want AI to edit a little bit, removing the person that you don't want in your background, or you want to create a new background for your product, but they are not purely AI generated. So there are it is true that AI inferencing would have some cost, but it's not like every photo now generated incurs a lot of cost. So I think we have to make that distinction first. And I think as we move along, when we are addressing these new verticals, like music videos that we're trying to get into, daily short AI videos that we're getting into with RoboNeo. So these are the things that is more experimental. We're using more third-party models. Margins on those new applications is going to be much lower than let's say Meitu, for example. But I think as we continue to progress, we'll develop our own models to replace some of the third-party costs. And I think over a much longer term, our belief is that the API cost is going to come down eventually as well. So we don't think this is a threat. In fact, I think if we're looking at it, the integration of AI really just expanded the addressable market so much that this is I would say is a much bigger opportunity than sort of like a threat.
Yeah, I appreciate the nuance you explaining how the first kind of usage actually, frankly, does not use that much AI, like that much token that people might expect it does in the headlines. But the second half, it does, but we're still in the very nascent stages of how this kind of plays out. Now, let me take a step back. Help us understand. For some of our maybe American or Western audience, they might not be as familiar to Meitu. So how do you fundamentally make money? I believe, in your public disclosures, consumer paid subscribers grew more than 30% year on year this quarter. What is driving that growth? Like, is it just the AI features are just so amazing right now? Or are you expanding globally, aggressively? Like, help us understand in general your business model and what's driving that growth.
Yeah. So our main revenue source is, as you said, is from subscribers. Those are mostly on the leisure side. So that's sort of like our second growth curve, because the first one is actually advertising, but that business has already matured. And the second growth curve, which is still in a very fast uptick right now, is the subscription on the leisure side. I think the main driver there is twofold, or actually three. I think the first one is if you look at China, right, the behavior of paying really just started after COVID. Before COVID, actually virtually all of the applications are free, and they are all competing with advertising, free to use advertising, or they redirect traffic to another sort of applications to generate money. And after COVID, I think all of a sudden, most of these user-facing applications realize advertising it's under a bit of a pressure during COVID, and they want to find new revenue sources. So they sort of, without colluding, they just started to charge users. And that really kickstarted the whole user subscription process. But what is less understood is user now suddenly face the realization that actually application has to be paid. And as time goes by, the behavior of user paying for application actually just grew on them. So now there's not much of an issue of this app has to be paid, so I'm not using it. Back then, there's really that sort of thoughts there. But now so this app costs 15 RMB a month. Does that worth it? So I think this is still sort of what I would describe as the beta factor, which is the market. So users are still getting used to paying for these. Sorry, not getting used to, but they're getting more and more used to pay for that mobile products. And this is also one of the reasons why we are quite confident that the paying subscribers, or the paying subscription rates rather, of our leisure application could continue to grow. To give you a sense, we've done some survey. The global paying percentage of these photo and video application apps, it's about 20%. Benchmark these against the music and video global apps versus Chinese app, they're usually as a factor of 2. So let's say Spotify is 40%, and the Chinese equivalent would be 20%. So if we look at the photo and video applications, that's about 20%. So in China, we should at least achieve about 10%. Right now, we're about 5 to 6%. So there's still sort of another 100%, 80 to 100% growth headroom there. The second growth potential is from international expansion. In the high ARPU areas like the US, Europe, East Asia, like Japan and Korea, the base ARPU is already a lot higher than China. We're talking about anywhere between 100% to 200% higher than China. And the paying percentage could be much higher than China as well. So to give you a sense, one of our applications called Airbrush in the US has over 50%, 50, of paying percentage. So again, as we are launching stronger and stronger operations in these high ARPU countries, we're expecting our blended paying percentage to grow even further. I think one final point about monetization is that we're integrating a bit more of these sort of generative AI capabilities into these applications. For example, Peachy, which is an sort of application for leisure, but it's using agent for editing. That has a completely new business model. So on top of the regular subscription, if you want to create your own models for your own, to apply your own skills, for example, that would, you have to pay for the model separately. So that's another way of monetization testing that we're currently working.
That's really interesting. And frankly, that's, when I was reading your earnings reports, I was actually a bit shocked that, your highest revenue generator is from consumer subscription, because the default mindset is that people have very little willingness to pay, right? But I think, whether it's the change in behavior in China, or because maybe people have a more of an appetite with the premium add-on or AI plus kind of idea, willingness to pay for that, or the fact that advertising is just too annoying to sit through, because you guys do have a lot of advertising, I have to say. So does Spotify. And I think that drives a lot of people to want to pay, right? To get rid of the advertising. So on that note, do you think you will gradually reduce certain dependency at advertising, because that is still your second largest revenue generating model?
Yeah, so I think we have not relied on advertising ever since 2022. So we made a point at the corporate level that we're no longer trying to strategically drive advertising. So you've seen our advertising has been sort of in the area of low single digit growth for the past few years. Yeah, so yeah, advertising, it's not what we are fundamentally trying to drive the business. However, I think we're experimenting with a lot of advertisers in terms of doing these, very fun and engaging AI infused campaigns for them. So for example, there's actually a lot of examples. It's very hard to describe with words, but you can imagine that you can generate some very viral photos with sort of the brand advertiser's brand on it that fits their brand image, and it will gives the uploader a lot of likes and then a lot of exposure to the advertisers. So I think these are the things that we're continuing to try on, but in any case, we're not relying on advertising for business growth.
I see. Makes sense. In terms of partnership, I just had this idea. I don't know if you guys are doing anything like this, but will you be partnering up in any way with, say, some of the consumer facing chatbots right now we're seeing in China, to help them with their video and visual side of things? I don't know. For example, if someone could go in Weixin Xiaochengxu, or someone can go through Doubao, but I guess there's competition as well. So how do you view yourself in that kind of relationship to these players?
Yeah, well, so I think we are open. In fact, we are already a official partner with Weixin, not on the
Xiaowei, right?
Xiaochengxu side, but it's on the I forgot the exact English name of it, but basically, when you're using the chatbot, you'll be able to call up Meitu Social. Obviously, right now it's still a very sort of light, sort of almost a bit like a traffic redirection type of relationship. But I think because our goal is really to democratize that, being able to work with more people and enabling more people to access that sort of power to express themselves, we're not against that.
Yeah. No, it just makes a lot of
We
sense.
Yeah,
Because they
yeah, yeah.
wouldn't frankly put in that much resource into this niche use case, and they don't have the edge to do that, but you guys have all the know-how in doing the best video image editing. So I
No,
wonder if we're texting
I
each other,
wouldn't. Yeah,
you can
no,
just
I wouldn't say they don't have the edge, but I think they just don't want to focus on that, because I think creating these applications needs a lot of focus. It needs sort of like the right organizational structure and the sort of laser sharp focus in trial and error, and just basically sit down and create the best aesthetic output for the users. These are not the things where I think a lot of larger companies would want to invest. I mean, it is an important thing relative to our size, but to them, maybe that's something that they don't want to. But if they want to do it, I think they can.
So I'm going to challenge you here a little bit, which is on these big tech, right? Like in China, there's definitely ByteDance, Kuaishou that equally have a lot of edge and moat in just having a massive data pool of image and visuals and videos, right? In the West, we have Canva, Adobe, and a series of different kind of global applications that do similar things. Even like the Shopify's of the world are creating their e-commerce kind of staging applications. Alibaba have certain similar things too. So in this whole big world of competition, if you like to put it, or peers, if you like to put it more friendly, how do you kind of see your strength, obviously given your culture, your expertise, and who do you think are the most relevant competitors that are more similar to what you're doing, and some are maybe not so similar to what you guys are doing, but on the surface people might mistaken that they are?
So I think we have to sort of separate that into two categories. So in the leisure editing side, I think with the exception of one business unit within ByteDance, there's not much people doing that globally. I mean, I don't think there's any real large company
Much
doing
smaller.
that in the US.
Mm-hmm.
The edge is really to continue to follow the trend, follow/setting the trend of what's the latest aesthetic standards, and that will help you to stand out on social media. These are the things that we have been doing over the past decade, and we'll continue to excel on that. On the productivity side, I think there are many companies doing similar things, but taking a much more general approach. So for example, if you look at Canva and Adobe, they are using one product to satisfy different verticals. So, Adobe is organizing around media. So, photos, vector diagrams, video, FX, so on and so forth. Canva is basically, okay, there's one editor trying to fit all kinds of situations. Similar to Figma, Figma is also one app fixing all applications. They are very design driven. We, on the other hand, it's much more vertically driven. So we're not restricting ourselves into a certain media type. We're saying within e-commerce, what do you need? You need product photos. You need very short product videos. You need ability to generate batches and batches of photos. You need to know what is the latest trend on the e-commerce platform that you're selling for that particular product. What should be the selling points? You also need to know what are the rules of, let's say, Amazon or Temu. What are the rules that you need to abide by in selling those pictures? So these are the things that will all bake into Design Kit. But if you're using Canva, I highly doubt that they will have a red flag say, oh, you shouldn't be using minors in this product photos. Canva wouldn't even know that you're creating a product photo in the first place. So these are the different focuses that we have. And in terms of competitors, I think it's hard to say who are your direct competitors, because at the end of the day, you can use Photoshop and Canva and us to create a e-commerce photo however you want it. So they are all sort of our peers, but we're taking different approaches. And if we take a step back, generative AI is still very, very early in its stage where, I mean, it's 2026 now, and generative AI really just started in earnest, I would say, late last year, because before late last year, a lot of these generative AI photos, immediately that they are AI generated.
Quite bad. It's like a six toe, or like that face is like
no I mean, even not those things. Like you look at the photo, even there's no obvious thing wrong, you kind of know that it is AI generated.
Yeah.
It's not so real. So
Yeah.
I think this is now is really just the point where we started to start to see things that are slightly harder to be distinguished between human made and AI made. And I think this is how we are able to empower the industry to increase the efficiency. So we're still very, very early in this market, and
Yeah.
that's why we're very optimistic and seeing a lot of opportunities.
No,
Okay.
that's really
Yeah.
interesting. And because, like a little bit of a side thing is like in 2019, I was still with CNBC doing traditional media and I covered deepfakes back then. And that was like kind of following the waves of deepfakes of like a lot of the videos Obama or Zuckerberg coming out. And then those
Mm,
are so obvious. And this like startup made a deepfake of myself. It was literally just plugging someone else's face onto my head and body, but nothing was like working essentially. But now these
mm,
like fake images and videos are really really hard to distinguish with human eyes. So on that, I want to ask you, how do you guys then, I guess, how do you view it ethically, like how do you stop maluse of these technology?
mm. Yeah. So first of all, I think we have put in some safeguards. So for example, let's say on PG, if you're generating a model of yourself using your own photos, that model cannot be applied to anything else other than your face. If we detected that it's not your face, then we won't allow you to apply that model to that face.
That's very interesting. It's so
Yeah.
advanced.
And then I think in some of our generation applications, we have put in safeguards in terms of certain words like violence or pornographic images. These things you cannot actually generate using our applications. So there are some safeguards that we put in there, but obviously we can only do so much, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think one other things that at least it's much sort of easier on us is because we organize our application into different verticals. So it's like the user come in using our application have a very strong idea that, oh, I'm creating e-commerce photos.
Mm-hmm. They have very strong intent knowing which
Yeah,
product to go into already.
so instead of giving them like a general chatbot where any random person can come up with a random idea,
Mhm.
change my face into put it into the president of the United States. Like it's slightly harder to imagine people who are using design kit to run a prompt like that.
I see what you mean.
So
That's
I
interesting.
guess organizing into a different vertical also help us in sort of mitigating this risk a little bit.
I see. So the last bit of I really want to talk about, your globalization, your global strategy. You are globally available. And I think it's quite interesting because again, like you said, you really made an intention to, focus on each vertical and you haven't done like a big splash and kind of like general marketing, but that feels like the case in your geographic location as well, right? You're in actually Southeast Asia, you're in Japan, Korea, you're in Europe or US, right? So so you are literally available globally. Help us understand scaling globally. What have been the challenges? How have you done it successfully? And then one last little thing is how do international users from different regions behave differently from your kind of home market users in China?
I'll answer the second part of the question first. They all behave very
Give me all the stereotypes.
not the stereotypes, but I'll give you one example. It's like when we're doing some user sort of focus group. I was in the UK and we talked to a influencer. It's a guy and he's like, your apps, like you can edit my jawline. That's incredible. I would totally pay for it, but I don't think it's a good idea to smooth out my skin.
Wait,
So,
why?
so
It's unethical to pretend you have good skin, but it's totally okay if you like give me a chiseled jawline.
well, he hasn't mentioned whether it's ethical or not, but that's just like his feedback word for word. So I think the challenge or the interesting thing, I think this is just two sides of the same coin, is that we have to really listen to what user wants in those areas and different geographic locations and create the right mix of features and marketing campaigns. I'll give you another really silly examples a few years back. So, Koreans also celebrate Lunar New Year, right? And then many years ago, we usually Lunar New Year is a festival where we got a lot of usage. And then we were like, how come there's no uptick in the Korean market with our latest features? Because that features in that particular year in China was very, very popular. And in Korea, there's nothing happens. And then a while later, we started to have local Korean colleagues helping us to run the marketing campaigns there. And it's like, wait a second. We Koreans generally celebrate Lunar New Year with white clothes and white themed, but you Chinese celebrate with red things. And then our market is like, but white things in China is usually for funerals. Like that's just totally doesn't register. So I think that example tells us that, there are a lot of things that we need to really immerse ourselves into that culture to get a sense of how people behave, what they care about, what are the standards. So we cannot stereotype anything. Every
Yeah.
place, every person behaves very differently, and this is where we think it's the biggest challenge, but it's also the biggest opportunities are. So now we are setting up offices in different parts of the world. We are sending product managers overseas very regularly to do more and more focus groups, study not studying, but really just experiencing the livelihood of the users that they are trying to serve. Back in the days, we relied too much on, consultants or reports or just reading online. But I think that's not enough anymore. And then we're now fixing that. I think we're making strides in some countries.
That's so
So
meaningful.
yeah, so finger crossed, I think we'll continue to grow bigger and bigger in the Western market. And I think one other tailwind that really help us is because I think with TikTok, our sense is that more and more, well, actually TikTok and K-pop, I think these two things really give us some tailwind, because I think back in the days, editing a photo seems to be something that it's unacceptable socially to a certain extent. But now I think with TikTok, people are getting slightly more relaxed that, these filters can be applied. You can play around with your face. There's no longer a taboo in a lot of Western countries. And the offense of K-pop also, influencing a lot of these cosmetic styles, which, in a way becoming a segue for us to sort of try different things in these Western markets. So I think there are very interesting things happening, but the most important thing is for us to really understand and live and breathe those cultures so we can create things that they want.
That's so meaningful, and I think it's something so important and new for like this new generation of like companies, the Chinese companies going global, having that awareness of like, you
Mm.
have to localize, but not just localize at a high level, reading like headlines and stuff like what you said, but really like understanding the culture, because culture influences business, and it's like it's ecosystem. Anyway, I want to wrap up. I really appreciate your time. You've given me an hour of your day today. My last two questions for you is, one is, what is the biggest misconception you think investors currently have about Meitu's business?
Misconceptions. So I think one of the biggest misconception is that general models is going to, destroy everything. There's no place for AI applications. We think it's quite unlikely in the visual side. I'm not sure about on the language side, but on the visual side, because as I said, aesthetic standards is very subjective. It's very personalized, and a lot of controllability is needed. Different verticals has different interpretation of the same word. So the way how models are trained and organized, even with agents, it's still very unlikely to have a sort of one size fit all general model to satisfy all kind of verticals. Every verticals have their own workflow and standards. So I think the AI application company, it's very important to make those adjustments and optimize the workflow for the users. Yeah, I think that's really the biggest misconception, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think we're seeing more and more of that realization right now within the market, actually. Like you have very strong vertical use case AI native companies coming through now, like Harvey and whatnot, right? And you have companies I've met where they are like like investors who are building equity analyst research tools. It's very, very niche use cases that they know. They know the process, they know the standard, they know the workflow better than anyone else. And even if the TAM is small, it's big enough for their own business. I really appreciate your insights. I think one last question I have for you is a question I ask every single person that comes on the podcast, which is, what is one differentiated view you hold? Something you think that's a bit against consensus
I think the life expectancy would be a lot longer than we think today for
in the
our
coming years
generation.
for our generation. So we're going to be living like 150 years, all thanks to Brian
Possibly.
Johnson's experiments, or why is
Then there'll
that?
be more time. Well, I mean, there's a lot of advancement in AI that, I mean, it basically speeds up a lot of the, pharmaceutical processes, right? And you can make a lot of different trials a lot quicker, understand the underlying issues much more efficient than before. And also, well, with more time, then there are more time for us to create more art.
And live a healthier life. Except right now, anyone working AI knows AI never sleeps. And I think we're all working more than ever. But thank you so much. That is definitely one differentiative view. I really appreciate your insights today and your sharing. Thanks again, Gary.
All right. Thank you so much, Grace, for this opportunity. Really nice talking to you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow AI Pro Podcast on Substack, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Thanks again, and see you next time.